So the launch of Last Epoch 1.0 is coming up this week, and I think a lot of us are pretty excited about it. As a fan of ARPGs like Path of Exile and Grim Dawn, I'm looking forward to seeing what the next generation in the genre might turn into. Like quite a few others, I've dipped my toes into the beta version of the game, enough to form some reasonably informed opinions, and there's a lot to like already, and a lot more to be hopeful for. That said, if I could wave a magic wand for the 1.0 launch, there are a few things, some minor, some major, that I'd like to see changed. I want to emphasize that this is just my opinion, coming at the game from a holistic perspective. I say that up front because the beta version is already a great experience for a lot of players. We've all heard heaps of praise about this game, and much of it is deserved. For someone who's interested in action, and loot, in crafting or trading better and better gear, and building up your character from struggling to kill the first few beetles the game throws at you, to wiping out entire screenfuls of epic mobs with each button press, this game pretty much already has you covered. I'm not going to cover all those things in detail. I more or less agree with the assessment of other YouTubers that there's a lot to like in the game. All that said, I do see plenty of room for improvement, and those are what I'm going to focus on in this video. By definition, this means I'll be giving constructive criticism. I want to emphasize that these negatives don't add up to my not liking the game. I do like it even in its beta form, and I can see true potential for this to be a top ARPG. But it's not there yet. I'd personally still rank this behind a couple of games that are 10 years old, Path of Exile and Grim Dawn, but I won't be at all surprised to see Last Epoch move up that ranking in the future, and I'm holding out hope that some of these deficiencies will be mitigated in the release this week, or soon thereafter. Right up front, I don't see content as an issue, and I don't think more content should be the highest priority. Yes, it would be nice. Endgame is extremely important in a game like this, and when you're looking at Path of Exiles as a baseline, there's obviously going to be a lot of catching up to do. But I think that will come in time. I'd naturally expect a game that's had 10 years of League mechanics incorporated to have a big head start on a new game. I hope this happens organically with time, rather than Last Epoch focusing all their efforts on chasing the proverbial white whale, while other parts of the game remain neglected. So what are those other parts? Let's start with the obvious. There are bugs present in the beta version, which is to be expected, and I really hope some of them will get cleaned up in the 1.0 launch. Online play is less smooth than offline, and since this is still a much smaller player base than we'll see after launch, one wonders how that's going to go. Basic things like an early quest bugging out and a dialogue needing to be repeated to register as completed, not game-breaking, but jarring as a part of the new player experience. I should never see a game flash my desktop background during a loading process. I'm conditioned to think that's a crash. When the game tells me it's going to take me back to the character select screen but instead goes back to the logon screen, that's a little bit of an issue as well. There are also parts of the game that feel clunky. Doorways between zones are one example. You get anywhere near them and you'll find yourself loading into a new zone even when you didn't want to. Again, minor, but they contribute to an overall impression of whether a game is polished or not. They should be fixed, and the fact that they're not after all this time leads me to a concern that the developers don't have attention to detail or don't consider these little issues important enough to spend time fixing. But let's not spend much time on those and move right on to some of the meatier issues. Gameplay. I think overall the gameplay feels pretty good, pretty smooth, pretty exciting. There are a few skill animations that don't feel quite as good as others, and sometimes the combat lacks a little weight. Overall, I think the visceral experience that is so important to the genre is in a pretty good place, but with room for improvement in a few places. I'm kind of hoping some of the older animations in particular get a little love moving forward. I'm not a long-term player myself, but I believe those who are, who say the newer skills look and feel a bit better on average than the older. Diversity and balance. Here's where the gameplay needs some fine-tuning. And this could probably be said for any ARPG to a certain extent. Seems like every game has its share of must-have versus avoid-at-all-costs skills, and Last Epoch is no exception. It's a monumental task, some might say an impossible one, to make every class and every skill feel balanced. But it should be the goal, And if there is a skill, class, or mastery that feels like a worse version of another, then one should ask why it's even in the game. If they do things correctly, with this mix of class skill trees in addition to a skill tree for every individual skill, Last Epoch looks like it could be the best game for buildcraft on the market. Not as complicated as Path of Exile, but complicated enough to give plenty of variety. This could be a game where we, the players, want to try the same character class over and over just to try out variations on those skills, and there would be countless build guides to reflect this. I'm really hoping the game will be an open canvas that rewards the player for trying new things rather than steering everyone towards the same meta builds. More options makes for a better overall experience, so long as they feel like potentially viable options. It's complicated because you definitely want bad builds without synergy to be bad, and good builds with lots of synergy to be better. But again, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd like to see melee or ranged, spell or attack, tanky or glass cannon or support options for all the different classes, if not each mastery. We're not really seeing that yet, as there are a few standouts that pop up over and over. But I think the game will get there. Beta is all we've had to experience so far, so I think we should patiently give the developers time to change things and test out what works and what doesn't. Story. I'm including in this section the writing, the voice acting, the cinematics, things like that. And before I start, I will admit that this is coming from an author's point of view, so maybe take some of this with a grain of salt. Not everyone cares equally about these things, so your mileage may vary. But I do think it's fair to say that there are opportunities for improvement here. Let's start with the story itself. It's fine. ARPGs aren't exactly known for deep, rich storytelling, and on that scale, this one feels adequate. It's very clear that the developers put the lion's share of their time and effort in other parts of the game. I'm reminded a bit of Jackie Chan movies. Now, I love Jackie Chan movies, but their plots are basically a vehicle to get from one chase or fight scene to another. That's kind of how this game felt. Anyway, there are two components of writing, the story and the style. As an analogy, when I was a kid, I loved Terry Brooks's Elfstones of Shannara. As an adult, I went back and reread it, and quickly realized that the story was every bit as great as I remembered, but the prose was quite disappointing. I suspect even Brooks himself would admit that his writing style left a lot of room for improvement. Why the heck am I talking about a book in the middle of a video game discussion? I'm glad you asked. Last Epoch tells an okay story, but the writing within that story, how should I say this? It's kinda bad. Here's an example of a dialogue with an NPC. Quick, curt, sometimes nonsensical fragments. There's no real substance or personality. You'll get a full sentence here and there, but the story is completely lacking in basic flair. You won't find clever exchanges, big reveals, foreshadowing, irony, any of the little details that make good storytelling. What you will find is the occasional grammatical error or voice inflection that doesn't match the circumstance. My guess is the developers decided that the majority of their player community skipped the dialogue to get back to the action, and they're probably right. Even so, this is low-hanging fruit. It would be really easy to move this from terrible to decent. You don't need Anthony Birch, just hire an English major intern to clean up the writing and add some kind of personality to it. As it stands now, the player gets invested in their gear and their skills, but not the world around them or their character's place within it. Maybe that's all the developers intended, but it feels like a serious lost opportunity. There are always gamers, myself included, who like to care about lore enough to be curious how events turn out. From the studio's point of view, this is also a good thing because it paves the way for expansions or sequels moving forward. Of course, I can't wave a magic wand, and I know many of these things are going to look the same on launch as they do in beta. That's fine. If we see incremental improvements making forward progress, I think that'll be enough to feel confident that the team is working to improve the all-round gaming experience. I, for one, am going to get some enjoyment out of the game either way. I'm just really hoping that it reaches its full potential, which could be something special. What do you think? Am I judging too harshly? Do these things come across as nitpicking, or important to so few players that you hope the developers don't waste time with them in favor of adding more content? Let me know what you think in the comments. In any case, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.